Om Shanti, and warm welcome to Interview with a Raj Yogi. I believe our topic tonight is the power of detachment. And so we'll start as usual with a little reflection. With just one thought, I bring a scene onto the screen of my mind. Very simple image. The image of a body of water, a pond, a lake, an ocean. And when the surface of that body of water is calm, how clearly I can see into the depths of that water. But if the surface of that water becomes choppy, uneven, restless, then it becomes very challenging to see into the depths. There's no clarity. The importance of creating stillness inside so that I can see, have clarity. What creates calm in my inner world, the surface of my mind? And what creates upheaval? To take a moment to reflect. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti. Welcome to Interview with Raj Yogi. And so, I believe what inspired this topic actually were these different capacities of the soul. And so, but there have been a few requests of different topics here and there, so that kind of changed the schedule a little bit. So, just trying to recall the original thread of this topic. And for those who have taken Raj Yoga, we used to traditionally have a course way back, which was called The Powers of the Soul. And perhaps maybe after a while we realize it might not necessarily be very useful if there isn't really a really deep grasp of soul consciousness. And I remember taking it before and then just start to focus on every single power by itself. So hopefully this isn't redundant for anyone, but this is a really important aspect. And when someone hears detachment, I know we talked about it in a previous session before, but in terms of a sense of self, why is that important?
Yeah, I think it depends a bit on how one's defining the word detachment. And there's a couple of things, to consider, but often when we think of detachment, letting go is a piece of that. And it very often got mixed up with emptiness or nothingness. So I'm going to detach or escape or let go, and it's moving away from or releasing or going into emptiness. And the idea that one actually becomes more full or more clear, or there is some attainment connected to detachment, is quite unique. So, this idea that if I want to have integrity of self or a sense of self, I need to not be influenced by things that are um, compromising that sense of self. So, this idea of letting go of that which is really not me, so that that which is me can emerge. So, it's really this attainment or gaining something as opposed to losing something. In this case, the self.
Mhm. So why use that word detachment? Maybe it's not necessarily about the word itself, but there's
Yeah.
why not say uninfluenced? Why not say free?
I like the word detachment because it's the opposite of attachment. And that's really the problem. Um, at the beginning, we had this reflection about the calmness and the clarity. And when we internally are very attached to something, you can almost visualize the string between, from inside me to something out there. And as that string continues to be used and drawn on, it becomes thicker and more rigid. It becomes a cable, invisible. So that if that cable is pulled, if the thing I am attached to moves, I am going to be pulled. And if that cable, that attachment, is an illusion that is defining me, so as an example that might be relevant now, say that string, that cable is work. So I have a string between my sense of identity, something inside me, and work, a very thick link. And let's say something changes in work or I lose my job. So that there's a movement on the work end of the attachment. I am going to be pulled, influenced. So you can feel the mind then gets into upheaval. I'm pulled. So to detach doesn't mean that the work has to go away, but that link of defining me is no longer there. So now I have a very free relationship with work, that I can be in work and all sorts of changes can go on. But because it doesn't define me, that attachment through self definition isn't there,
Mm.
I'm not pulled all over the place.
So is it then because of that key ingredient of not this meaningful sense of awareness of my real sense of self that you really can't really move away from something then if you don't really have any identity?
To ask someone to detach without replacing it with something else, I think is almost impossible.
Mhm.
I mean, yes, you can, but you'll just attach somewhere else. We need to have a sense of self that gives us a sense of value. And if we cannot internally generate that or eternally generate that, we will look for it somewhere. We can't go without it. So, sure, you can, people say, okay, I'm free of that, but then they go and find it in something else external
Mm.
until such time as I develop an internal sense of self, which is an eternal sense of self.
Now, when we use the word power of detachment, it sounds like it's a capacity. So, how do you build that? I know we talk about consider myself to be a soul, but practically, what has that been experience been like for you these years in the study in terms of what that was like in the beginning? Um, as it progressed, did it hit and miss?
We talk about, yes, I can consider myself to be a soul, but there are some other issues that have gotten into the soul. So we talk about the power of detachment interchangeably with actually the power of purity. And it's a funny thing. It becomes a natural, as I just have to accumulate it. So we talk about, I'm not just going to consider myself to be a soul, I'm also going to remember the supreme soul. This is actually what creates that power of purity or detachment. And it's literally like fueling up on something. It's not intellectual at all. So that I actually begin to operate differently because of having
Mhm.
yoga with the Supreme Soul. I just have more clarity and I'm less affected. So it's, I know that we want sort of worldly methods and things, but I've really found the natural sort of constant way for it to be there is if I am changing through my relationship with the purifier, the Supreme Soul.
So maybe you kind of colored what the part of the question I was going to ask is why can't I just consider myself to be a soul? If
Hmm.
we're talking about detachments in terms of my sense of self, why isn't that just enough?
Yeah, what we've noticed is, and certainly please experiment with it, everyone, but when we consider ourselves to be a soul, when we're seated and we have very beautiful experiences, but that should be enough. God shouldn't be necessary at all. The reason that God is necessary is whilst not considering myself to be a soul, a lot of very interesting dynamics developed within the self, which it's almost like a surgeon, a spiritual surgeon needs to address. So this yoga with Supreme Soul helps to correct those dynamics that developed within me. So we'll have beautiful experiences when conditions are ideal. And I just want to say, conditions are ideal is different for every soul because the dynamics that developed inside are quite personal. I mean, they have the same overarching themes, ego, etc., but the details of how ego operates in each one is a bit unique. So we talk about as your buttons are pushed. So I can have a beautiful meditation experience and then I get up and someone walks into the room and they say purple elephants and I just lose it, right? Because I've had an experience at some point with purple elephants and it's done something. So those little buttons inside have to be deactivated. And considering myself to be a soul is not going to be enough. I actually need this force of purity from the purifier to help to melt away all those buttons inside.
Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, we learn about these different capacities that I, the soul, have. And what have you discovered that can possibly be used in terms of practicing detachment that might be just a very limited way versus a way that's actually the whole point of Raja Yoga?
In general, it's very interesting. It's connected to an earlier conversation about thinking about something and it will have some limited use. But when I really accept it, it becomes reality to me. It's a completely different ball of wax. So, there used to be a thing about, you could have the thought, for example, if you're interacting with someone, just saying, well, they're a soul too, and they're playing their part. And, so you have these thoughts going through, but it hasn't become your reality. You still think that you're that physical being.
Still feeling affected.
Exactly. So that means that the emotions, that sort of vulnerability to an emotional impact is still there. You'll be able to control it, but the dynamic is still there, however controlled. It isn't actually going away. So the importance of actually, and we had an interesting point in this morning's class actually that I really liked. This term self realization. And once you get into the study, it's quite interesting the things we've attached to. You wouldn't think that we would consciously say, "Oh, I'm going to attach to that," because who's going to attach to low self-respect?
Mm.
No one's going to say, "I'm going to attach to low self-respect," but that's pretty much Daddy Genki, the administrative head before the current one, Daddy Gulzar, used to give many classes about don't attach to sorrow. And it's like, who's going to attach to sorrow? And yet it's exactly what we've done. As you go through this study, you realize how, forgive me, I don't mean to insult, but how clueless we are at the depth of um, of really illness, spiritual illness that has come into us, and how attached we are. to highly dysfunctional things. To sit there saying I'm a soul, I suddenly realize it's not nearly enough. And so, we had this sort of point this morning about self realization. And you begin to realize that, yes, it's important to know I'm a soul, but it's also important to know what happened to the soul. It's also very important to know that I'm going to be successful in this. There's a lot of things, very deep, deep things that need to come in that worldly approaches simply can't can't they can't have the same impact. It's so, as you go along, you begin to see how deep, how these are spiritual issues, which are the deepest issues that can happen to us, and it requires quite, and when I say deep, I don't want to sound like it's psychoanalysis, but just very unique um, approaches to be able to address them. We really don't have a clue about ourselves, quite frankly.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like from what you're sharing, though, that we can have quite superficial uh, understanding or application or reflection of soul consciousness and not even realize that we're doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps maybe then we don't feel like we're able to actually have a capacity to be able to feel that I can be unaffected or let go or actually have a better or deeper understanding of myself. Mhm.
I was really, I think, a little lucky when I came into the study because there were still many, many of the original jewels around. And just seeing them and listening to them, it became clear to me that the depth of effort they had made, they're still studying after 60, 70, 80 years. New ones come along after a year or two, a week or two, and say, no, I understand everything. I'm good to go. And I never got that feeling because there were so many senior students around me, and it was quite clear to me, looking at how intently they studied, that there was a lot to this. That if after six, and I knew it wasn't that they're super slow, that was clear, they were not. It sort of was and it suggested to me that as we study, there will be much resistance from within the self that does not want to let go of us, does not want to detach. And that resistance will morph and change itself any way it needs to try to stop us from transforming, from basically benefiting ourselves. And so it really made me aware of just how humble one needs to be. One of, we say I am attached to low self respect. It's the same as saying I'm attached to ego. They're exactly the same thing. And it's just a constantly humbling experience. We'll say, oh, no, I understand, I get it. And then a week later, no, I don't actually get it. But now I think I got it. And after a while, you realize, you know what? I'm going to be getting this my entire spiritual journey. I might as well just accept that now, that there's no end to getting it. And it's really very, one with humility is very lucky.
This power of detachment, when we're talking about it, can be used in a very limited way in that sense. And you were sharing about, it's more than just considering myself to be a soul, but it is this connection with the Supreme Soul. What has your experience been like in terms of that experience, practically speaking, experience of detachment? I know that quality was something that really resonated with you even before being in this
Mm-hmm.
study.
Mm-hmm.
So that memory or that attraction to that, and what did that look like in practice through time?
It's funny. Yeah, I had it seemed a very, I was fine with detachment. It actually always was because prior to coming to the study, it was actually more of a detached observer. It was very connected to accuracy. That, through, if you will, dance training as an example, you had to be able to kind of we sometimes use the word objective, which is why I'm saying detached observer. Be objective in order for self progress to happen. You had to be able to self correct. And self correcting requires that you be able to observe yourself objectively. And that doesn't mean harshly or punitively, it's just clearly like you. The less blind spots you have, the better a dancer you can
Mm.
become. And so it was a very healthy in the sense that it was connected to self progress. It wasn't in any way cold or uncared. Like there was no connotations of that whatsoever. It was the sense of to benefit the self, I need to be able to see clearly, in this case, what the body is doing. It's just the bottom line. Like if I'm pretending, or in my mind's eye, my leg is at, it's high up, wrapped around my ear, but in fact, it's like 1 inch off the ground. I need to be able to see that clearly, right? I mean,
Mm.
how am I helping? So but that required a very healthy sense of self confidence, self respect. So it had a really powerful, positive feeling to it.
Mm.
And then coming into the study, it is actually connected to love. And so when we take an example like being able to feel God's love, if I do not detach from feeling bad about myself, it will be very challenging to feel God's love. Not because God isn't giving love, but because I am not capable of receiving. I'm too attached to the
Mm.
past. I'm just so, again, it's that sense of a detachment that's connected to benefiting
Mhm.
the self. There's nothing uncaring or cold about it. And so, definitely, I think it's very important to have a healthy relationship with this idea of detachment. And it is a huge power. Power means a force to benefit.
Mhm.
So there's a very benevolent feeling with detachment.
Well, first of all, I'd say you're lucky that you had a good relationship with
I
it. For
know.
some, they feel like I'm hoot. Every time
No,
I hear it,
no.
it doesn't make me feel good.
Mm.
So, what do they do?
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of, let's replace it with another word, because the word isn't going to go away. So again, I'm having buttons pushed every time I hear it. But let me see if I can understand the word, and to understand it, it's this is one of the most key and most interesting parts about Raj Yoga, because it's one thing to be a 6-year old going into grade 1. You're a completely clean slate. You have no other ideas. You're not going into grade 1 thinking 1 plus 1 equals 8. And now the teacher has to spend the entire year convincing you that 1 plus 1 equals 2, because you're so attached to the deep belief that 1 plus 1 equals 8, right? We have a clean slate. However, with something like spirituality, we have very deep beliefs we're attached to. And that's actually what makes the word detachment feel
Mm.
uncomfortable. Not the word itself, but the beliefs that I have
Mhm.
created and I'm still carrying with me, which means I'm going to be very challenged to get, unless I start to be open to releasing those beliefs. And again, soul consciousness is very helpful for that.
To be open, to
Cleaning the
become
slate
open.
is
Mhm.
very helpful for that. So, I have it because I could say, okay, yeah, if I say unconditional love, we're all very happy. Unconditional love and detached and loving are exactly the same thing. But yes, some might feel I prefer unconditional love. Can we just say no, we can't, because it's not methodically, it's not going to get you
Mm.
there. It is detached and loving. I have to let go of certain things. I will never get to that state. So it's not just saying the what, which is unconditional love, it's
Mm.
also saying the how.
Mhm.
So it is an important word. I understand why souls don't like, but in general, we really are asked to have objectivity
Mhm.
around whether I'm mixing this with
Mm.
things I'm still attached to.
It's a very good point because you do hear that word all the time, unconditional love, but you
Mm-hmm.
never hear that, well, there's certain expectations that we all have. We're certainly fixated in certain things. It's as if it's an elephant in the room and we don't acknowledge it. And yet
Mm-hmm.
we want to pursue for unconditional love and not acknowledge, is that really actually possible? Hmm. So the last thing that you were talking about in terms of power. Now,
Mm-hmm.
it's an interesting question. Sometimes, if for those who've taken the course, you hear about the virtues of the soul, then you hear the powers of the
Mm-hmm.
soul. Is detachment a virtue and also a power, and what's the difference?
The way that we have sort of been taught to look at these ideas, because is love a virtue? Is love
Hmm.
a power? Um, when I experience it as a quality in the self, it's like a virtue. I
Hmm.
have this quality, but when I use it, it's a power. And so, yes, I want to experience it. It will be experienced as a very beautiful, sweet silence. I want to experience it. The question is, can I then integrate it into my day to day life while acting and interacting? That's a power. So I could be see, and detachment, I say, is one of the top in the mythology. It's the first goddess who emerges, Durga, the goddess of detachment. It's huge. All the goddesses are born through. So it's a huge, huge. I'd say if you go up to someone and say, let go, something very challenging has happened to them, very disturbing, and it's staying in their mind. They can't stop thinking about it, even if they want to. The power to let go is not there. Yes, they can have very beautiful, peaceful experiences where they feel very free, which is another word you often associate with detachment, very free, except around that issue. So the power is not there. Yes, the soul has the capacity to experience it. That is a quality of the soul. But the power, purity, but the power isn't there to actually apply it to that issue. And that again comes back to the yoga, right? Cleaning away those dynamics in the soul so that it becomes a power. So I would actually even say that souls in their heart are extremely attracted to the quality of detachment.
Well, that sounds so hopeful.
They do want to let go. They do
Right.
want to be free.
Hmm.
It's just because we don't have the power. We try
Mm.
to have that freedom by moving away or
Right.
pushing away or
Hmm.
escaping rather than being in it. And it just, it doesn't affect me. I'm free.
There was something that you had said quite a few weeks ago that really helps uh, for those who grapple to understand that it becomes a disturbing word, not because of the word itself, it's because of the state I am in.
Mm,
If I'm in that state where I'm in an experience of actually still fixated on something, that the word attachment actually can be quite threatening in that way. But it really feels like when you were talking about just a moment ago about being able to be open, because then I think there are souls who are like, how do I become open?
mm,
How is it that soul consciousness is going to help me be open? So
mm.
how is soul consciousness going to
I
help one
think
be
that,
open?
yeah, it's funny. I think that's why we start with seated meditation, because it's really quite artificial given our end game, which is not to have to meditate at all. I just become this different being, if you will. There's transformation. But to start, so that I start with a very rudimentary experiences of these. And so if we look at something like soul consciousness, what is it saying? Yes, in the Course, we say you are a point of light in the center of the forehead. And that's almost just trying to give me an entry into the actual experience. It is not the experience, the entirety of the experience itself, but it's an entry point because time and again, and it's not just Raj Yoga, other disciplines have suggested that the cause of sorrow, the cause of peacelessness is attachment. And I would go so far as we're not just attached, we're actually addicted. And so what happens with soul consciousness is it's reframing me, it's giving me a different way of positioning myself that actually will naturally release me from those bondages. And the example we often use is the actor in a play who has amnesia. So, if an actor's in a play, normal conditions is all sorts of situations can be going on in the play, but he's unaffected because he knows it's a play, right? He's not really that character. Those aren't really his relatives. Those aren't his stuff. They're just props, other actors, everyone speaking their line. Someone in the play can come up. I've seen live plays and they can have very intense conversations. And then you see the actors backstage afterwards, the same ones that look like mortal enemies on stage. Backstage, they're best friends and it's quite remarkable. So this is very natural because they're always aware
Mm.
that they're not that character, they are the actor. But what if they stopped being aware and they're on the stage? And yes, they're saying very hurtful things to each other, but they don't know that it's just a play anymore. They have amnesia. Now they can't detach. Now they're
They have a
affected. Now
completely
they're
different
hurt.
experience.
So you can see just by reminding them, you don't have to go through therapy. They don't have to do just that one thing. You're an actor. It's a play. Just that reminder, bringing them on is a complete game changer.
Mm.
So this is why you're a soul. You're a soul. You're playing a part. This is a costume. It has a story. Those are other actors. These are not your stuff. They're props. It's the exact same scenario. The problem is we don't really go there. We intellectually get it, but we don't actually go there. We don't actually feel it deeply. So it won't have the effect. I have to completely accept it for it to work. Right? So the actor in the limited example, he has amnesia and everyone's saying, you're not really this character. And you say, oh, okay, yeah. But deep down, he still thinks it's
Mm-hmm.
not going to work. Right? So um, to sit and take the time to very honestly, you know, reflect on being a soul very honestly is the starting point.
So why isn't enough? I mean, it's a great example you give in terms of the actor, and it's like you are an actor, and in theory, he would snap right out of it. Oh my
Mm.
gosh, detach right away, detach from this illusion. And why is it that it just seems such a challenge for us to be able to wake up in that kind of way?
I think part of it is that we've got such deep what was created while we were in amnesia. Um, that creation is now opposing us. And we talk about the creation as the ego, the desires, and it's opposing us because it's got a control over us at the most powerful, deepest level, which is value, self respect. It has so much control over us. It has incredible rights over us, or so it seems. It's odd. So that we're like, okay, I'm ready. It's like, no, we've seen plot lines like this where the actor says, okay, I'm ready to walk out of this situation now. So I said, no. And it's like they stalk them, right? They just can't, it should be easy. They just walk away. It's like this opposition is stalking them. And it's a bit like these creation that we created when we forgot ourselves now does not want to detach from us. And we give it a lot of rope to work with. We engage it in our mind. So a thought comes, and because we don't have detachment, we can't clearly see. And this requires, this is really gone through in the course, in terms of how scars start to work through our own minds. But a thought comes, we don't identify it for what it is because it's so well disguised, and we engage with it. And we forget we're a soul, we forget God, we're suddenly under control of what had been created while forgetting ourselves. So
Perhaps this is the last question that would segue into our little reflection is for yourself on a day-to-day level, just you're just practicing soul consciousness. What does that look like in terms of just refining that capacity to learn to be one that is practicing detachment, not for the limited reasons, but sounds like it's so much to do with being able to maintain a sense of self.
More time looking inwards at what consciousness am I in? Have I slipped into amnesia again? And so it's really an art of paying attention to the self. And I say that because the first student, Brahma Baba, I mean, that's really what I think he demonstrated is he was constantly paying attention to his what's going on inside his inner kingdom.
I feel we'll might have to have a topic on introversion. It's very much connected, but we should probably transition to a reflection since we're coming close to the end of our session.
I don't know if anyone had questions.
Unfortunately, we won't be able to see.
Do you want me to approach?
No, we have a monitor here that seems to not be working.
Mm, okay, looks quiet.
Thank you.
Each of us, of course, has the capacity to be a detached observer. That is to observe from a place that is calm, peaceful, clear. I experiment now. I observe this body in which I sit. Usually I pay very little attention to it unless there is a crisis. But now I'm going to experiment with my power to observe. I start on a very easy level. Can I observe the outline of this body where every limb is placed, the positioning of the body? And I can observe the breathing of the lungs, just focusing only on that. And how is the breathing of the lungs? Is the body breathing in a healthy way? And then I can shift to the alignment of the spine, observing the alignment of the spine. And again, is the spine aligned in a healthy way? I can shift again much deeper to the thoughts in my own mind. Can I catch every thought right now that is being created by me in my own mind? No judgment, just observing. As I observe, I notice how everything else goes out of focus. It requires all my attention to observe one thing, whether it's the breathing, the posture, or the thoughts. We usually use this capacity to observe on the outer world, watching others intently, observing our electronic devices. We have the capacity. The question now is, where do I want to focus that capacity? Om Shanti.
Om Shanti. Thank you. Thank you, Judy. Helps us also realize how much we want to practice, but one of the things during the reflection was also this faith in my capacity that I'm able to. Not this constant question: Am I doing it right? Am I doing it right? And so, thank you for joining. I'm going to pass this back to Judy in terms of upcoming sessions.
Thank you, Nora. So, we will repeat the same formula on Thursdays. We have experience drop in meditation for the public, and these are all archived and uploaded to the YouTube channel BK Calgary. So we will have drop in meditation 6:45 to 7:30 on Thursday, and an interview with a Raj Yogi looking at more the basics of Raj Yoga 7:35 to 8:15. And this Thursday it is spiritual study. And then on Saturdays we will continue with inner fitness on the Zoom platform. We're now recording those, so with the consent of the participants. So those will be uploaded as well. You might see them if you're on the YouTube channel. The Inner Fitness series. There'll be a playlist coming. I believe this Saturday, October 3rd, the focus is team lead. There was a request for that. So playing the part of a team lead. See what that means spiritually. So you're welcome to join us real time for these sessions, but also enjoy the archive versions on the YouTube channel. Thank you so much for joining tonight. Om Shanti.